Your leg day probably trains your quads and your glutes really well. But did you know your hamstrings do two completely different jobs? Most programs only hit one. Let me show you the 5-category framework that I use that fixes this without adding a single extra workout to your daily routine or adding time. Good morning and welcome to week 15 leg day. We're over halfway through week 15. The workout for today on leg day, let's see, it's barbell squat, Bulgarian split squat, Romanian deadlift, standing leg curls, and single leg standing calf raises. So looking forward to getting that. We're gonna break down what makes a good and complete leg day, especially if you're like me and you do a push-pull legs routine and you only hit legs once per week, right? So it becomes pretty critical that you have a complete leg day that hits all the muscle groups that you need and want to hit with the correct volume. And there's a lot of information out there. There are a lot of different leg exercises you can do. How do you know if you've missed something, right? I like to think in terms of muscle movement categories. That helps me make sure that I have a simple framework that I can check. Do I have this framework or do I have this movement category? And I have different exercises within each of those categories that I can swap from routine to routine. So if I get bored or if I'm feeling like one area is needing a little bit more work, I can swap things out when I change my next routine. And then there's also just personal preferences that come into it, right? For example, I kind of hate front squats. So I do them if I'm noticing that I need that extra stimulus that it gives for quads. But a lot of times if I'm needing extra stimulus for quads, I'd rather just do a different movement that focuses on the quads. I like to stick with my normal back squats, and one thing you can do is have a little bit narrower stance that focuses a little bit more on quads versus a wider stance. But then I'll also, in my other exercises throughout the workout, make sure that if there's a workout that can emphasize more quad or more hamstring or something like that, I'll lean towards the quad. So let's talk about the nuances a little bit later. Let's get our warm up for quads for our squats going, and then we'll talk about the different categories, what they are, and how they fit together. All right, first warm up set for squats. We've got 50% of 305 loaded, or around about there. We've got 155 on here. So we're doing 50%, 10 reps. Ooh. Here are the 5 categories. I'll give you the easy terminology and then the more technical terminology. It really, if you wanted to break it down into muscle groups, I would call it quads, glutes, hamstrings, and then the last 2 categories are less muscle based, and I would call them unilateral work and accessory work. The way that breaks down into the movements that I talked about is knee extension, right? Knee focused, knee extension, that's your quads. Hip extension, that's going to be your glutes and posterior chain. And then we're going to focus on knee flexion for our hamstrings. And then unilateral work, typically we'll work a little bit of both of those. And then our accessory work is going to be things that we'll do like our adductors, which is a fancy way of saying like your groin, and calves. Warm up set 2. As always, the warm-up set is 2 sets at 50% of our working weight, 10 reps. Then we do a third set at 75% for 6 to 8 reps. We're going to break down each of these categories and talk about different options for exercises you can do within them and some variations within those. And then we'll talk about a couple of real world leg splits that I've done in the past and how they fit into this framework and are complete, or maybe how they might be missing some parts of the framework. And I was unknowingly missing some important work. Got my strength belt on. When I think of a leather weightlifting belt like this, I always think of Matilda in that scene when Trunchbull's coming out of her house and she's got her sweats on and she's got her belt and she's got a javelin and hammer throw and stuff. She's throwing them into her car and then she's chasing them around the house later, right? So that's what I like to imagine that I'm Trunchbull with my weightlifting belt on. Hopefully that's a funny image for you too. But let's get this last warm-up set. We have 75% on, I believe, or thereabouts. I'll shoot for 6 to 8. All right, first category, knee dominant, knee extension, quads, whatever you want to call it. But my favorite exercise here is obviously just going to be the obvious back squats, right? It's a bilateral quad heavy. It does work your posterior chain as well, but it's definitely a good option in this category. Some variations would include front squat, which a lot of people are familiar with, and that's going to be, again, a little bit more quad centric, and obviously it's going to require a lot more core engagement. Not that back squat doesn't require core engagement. And then another less known variation that I really like if I want to focus on quads, isolate them a little bit more, is the Anderson squat. And that is where you get these, your safety pins, you raise them up, and the whole idea of the Anderson squat is that you're starting from the bottom and lifting up. A normal squat, you start upright, you bend, and you go up. With an Anderson squat, you start low, so you rack the bar down here, and you go up and come back down and let it go. And come back up, right? So it's kind of, I don't have a leg press machine, right? So a leg press machine is another great option for this category. To me, the Anderson squat is the closest I can get to that. It's still not exactly the same. Yes, it still does put some load on your back and stuff like that, but I find that it isolates the quads a little bit more because you don't get the momentum of coming down and back up. And I use that to help me get unstuck and break plateaus if back squat is feeling stale and if I'm not really wanting to do front squats. If you haven't tried them, try it out. You'll be amazed at how little weight you can do with Anderson squats versus regular squats. So, let's hit this weight and then we'll talk about a couple more. First set of our working weight of 305. Last week we did 455. So let's see if we can shoot for 5 right out of the gate. Some machine options would be, as we talked about already, leg press, hack squat, which is kind of like the reverse leg press. And let's see, it's not covered. I don't have it in my list, but it's the Smith. I would say the Smith machine counts because that's keeping you quite stabilized. So I would count that. The non-machine stabilized option would be to do heel elevated goblet squats. Goblet squats, you just take a dumbbell or a kettlebell, you hold it here and squat down. Raising your heel up on a weight plate or something like that gives you a little bit more stability. It's also why I use weightlifting shoes that have an elevated heel. It gives a little bit more stability. They usually also have a wider base. And then there are unilateral options as well. And that just is a fancy way of saying single leg. My favorite for that is Bulgarian split squats, which we have up after these regular squats. There's also the ATG split squat, which is the Bulgarian split squat, but it's deeper, right? Where you get to try and touch the back of your hamstring to your calf. It's a deeper squat, and there are various levels of difficulty with that. And of course, forward lunges is always another option. You can do lunges with barbell on your back or carrying dumbbells or kettlebells, whatever. The thing to keep in mind here is that this category, how you know if it fits in this category. If the knee is doing most of the bending, the quads are doing most of the work. And so that's typically going to be things that have a forward bend in them. That's going to be your primarily knee extension dominant, quad focused category workouts. All right, let's get our second set of squats at 305. We got 5 on the first one. It felt kind of hard. Let's see if we can get 3 sets at 5. The second category is hip dominant movements, and these are going to be glute biased. The reason why I didn't pick this one as one of the most overlooked is because I think in recent years it has grown in popularity. People are starting to care what their posterior looks like. All right, so it's getting attention. Specifically, I've seen lots of people doing, what do you call them, bridges or hip thrusts, right? Knowing that they're trying to focus on the glutes, or they'll do the standing reverse leg extension things, where again, you're hinging at the hip, trying to get that glute. And then Romanian deadlifts. I've got Romanian deadlifts programmed into my routine. And those can be bilateral, but I also really like a unilateral or a single leg RDL with dumbbells as well. So I think the glutes have been seen a little bit more prominence than they have maybe, I don't know, when I was growing up 20 years ago or 30 years ago. I could be wrong about that, but I just don't see them being overlooked. They seem to be pretty well included in typical workouts. So the only other exercise I have in here would be the back extension. I don't have a back extension machine, but that would be where you're on a machine. It allows you to bend and supports your torso, and then you extend, and you can hold a weight. You can do it with both legs. You can do it single leg. In fact, most of these can be done bilaterally or unilaterally. So lots of great options for glutes. Hip thrusts, some lower variations or some lesser regressions would be a bridge on the ground. This is something that I did when I had some hamstring rehab work that I was doing, because hamstrings do tie into your hip, right, and into your glute. And sometimes hamstring injuries can be a result of neglected glutes, of weak glutes, right? If the hamstring is overcompensating for weak glutes, sometimes you can see that be the root cause of hamstring injuries. So that covers it for the hip hinges, I think. I do have written down that takeaway for hip hinge glutes are the glutes are hit hardest when the hip moves, but your legs don't, right? Or specifically when your knees don't move. So that's what we talked about, those RDLs, right? You're trying to keep your knees from bending too much and you're hinging at the hips. Same thing with the back extensions, hip thrusts, and bridges, which are kind of the cousin of hip thrust, I would say. I think this is the last set. Let's get our last set of heavy squats. 305. I say heavy. It's heavy relative to me. It might not be heavy for you beasts. Let's try and get 5 of these. We can get 6. Maybe we can go up next week, but 5 has been feeling like a good stimulus. We'll leave 6. Leave that to next week if we can get it. Next up, we've got Bulgarian split squats. Let me get that set up, see if the camera can keep track of me while I do that. Bulgarian split squats, lunges, ATG squats, even single leg squats, just with your leg tucked behind you, or what might be considered a pistol squat. These unilateral exercises are a great alternative to heavy back squat. If you have back issues or any kind of injury that prevents you from doing squats, I keep hearing more and more and seeing it on the interwebs, people talking about heavy back squatting not being something that is a longevity exercise. I don't know if I agree with that 100%. I think you can certainly do back squats for a very long time, as long as you're keeping up with it and you don't have edge case injuries and stuff like that. You may find that you bring the weight down and move the reps up. So if I'm doing 4 to 6 reps now, maybe I bump that up to 6 to 8 and then 8 to 10 and 10 to 12, right? And then this less weight should be easier to move with less risk. That being said, I don't like dealing in absolutes. I'm not a Sith. So I do like to give the caveat and the allowance and say there are plenty of unilateral, which are going to be much lower weight options. So, and I do them. Even now, I don't just only do bilateral quad exercises. I also do unilateral ones because I want to make sure that I don't have imbalances, and these can work other muscles as well. I get a little bit more isolation on my quads. So I've been doing Bulgarian split squats for a while now, and I hate them, but I love them. They just get such a good stimulus. They look deceptively easy, folks. Like, you watch these and they're the most unimpressive thing to watch, but try them out and you'll see they are killer. So let's stop talking. Let's do the thing. Changing my shoes because I do like my weightlifting shoes with the elevated heel and the wide sole for squats, but for the rest of the workouts in my leg day, I like to just have a regular cross-training shoe on. I've used Reebok Nanos in the past. I've got some Noble, whatever their shoe is called now. Not a completely flat heel, certainly not like a barefoot shoe. Some people like to do their leg work barefoot, and that's fine. I like to have just a flat sole, reasonably wide toe box shoe. But as I was going to bring it up as I'm changing shoes, if you have Bulgarian split squats are great. I also want to advocate for lunges and ATG split squats. If you have not seen or heard or watched any of the knees over toes guy, I don't know if it's both. Are they both plural? Is it knees over toe? I don't know. Anyway, check that channel out. He's really big on knee health and leg health and strength and mobility. And this ATG squat is really great for that. The basic premise of it is it's kind of like a lunge. It's between a lunge and a Bulgarian split squat. But the point is that you try to keep your heel on the ground if you can, and you try to touch the back of your hamstring to your calf. So I don't have enough mobility in my ankles actually to do it. So I typically have to put a weight or two plates on the floor, and that's how you regress it. You can get it up on a chair or a stool, but the idea is that you want to be able to go down as low as you can and back up. And then eventually, as you get more mobility and more strength, you can go lower with your foot on the ground and you can add weight. So keep that in mind. We're not doing that today. We're doing Bulgarian split squat, but I just wanted to point it out. All right, the Bulgarian split squat. That's not a Bulgarian accent. That is a Scottish accent. I don't know why I chose that, but I did. Oh man, like I said, that probably looked so easy, but that last rep was hard. The key thing to remember on Bulgarian split squats is that you want almost all of your weight on your front foot. That back leg on the bench or whatever you're using to stabilize, that's what it's there for, stabilization, nothing else. You should not be actively pressing down on that. I think 90% of the weight on your front leg, 10%. Even that seems too much for me. I feel like if I aim for 10%, I'll do more. I aim for 1 or 2%. And in reality, it probably comes out to 10%, but I like to think of that as strictly there for balance and stabilization. Most of that work should be done on the front leg. I've said it before too. I do like this. One of our categories is accessory works in adductors or groin muscles. And I actually really like this as a groin stretch. I feel like, just like with ATG squats probably would be just a really good stretch in between here. I can feel my hip flexors and my internal groin stretching out there and also here. And so I've pulled my groin in the past, and in doing some rehab, both doing like regular adductor work, this has been a great workout to ease me back into heavy back squats. All right, second set, just a different angle here. You can see, maybe it'll look more exciting or less exciting, I don't know. You can also do these with a barbell on your back. I don't know, that might be easier or harder for some people to balance that way. So far, we've talked about quad movements, focusing on knee extension. We've talked about hip focus, hip hinge, glute focused movements. And we're about to go into one of these. I've got one more set of Bulgarian split squats, and then we will do Romanian deadlifts. The next category is knee flexion, and these are going to be hamstring focused. And the reason that I give it its own is because when we talk about knee extension, quad, but knee flexion is when you bend, and that's going to be your quad, right? And earlier in the video, when I talked about the hamstring having two important jobs, certainly it does do have some work in knee extension, right? And hip flexion, right? Because the hamstring comes all the way up your back, right? It comes all the way up and touches your glute. So it interacts with your hip, but a lot of people will neglect the isolated part that the hamstring does in this flexion. And so I like to make sure that we focus on and include specific exercises for that. Those exercises are, the obvious one is a leg curl, right? So you can do a lying leg curl or a seated leg curl. There are machines for that. I don't have a machine for that. I'll show you later in the workout how I do that with the cable machine. I do a standing leg curl. You can also do sliding on the floor, sliding leg curls. I don't know what they're called. They kind of get into a bridge position, and then you extend your knees out, you slide them out, and then pull them back up. That is another one that's great if you have a hamstring injury and you need to rehab. And then my favorite, and certainly not least, but the last one that I'll say is the Nordic hamstring curl. And that is the mother of hamstring bulletproofing exercises, I would call it. And I don't have it programmed in this particular routine, but I have done it probably the past 2 or 3 routines in a row. Something I like to incorporate because I have had hamstring injuries in the past. And once you pull a hamstring, you're something like 200% more likely to pull it again. So anything I can do to negate the likelihood of pulling it again, I will do. So that's why I make sure that I do a dedicated hamstring exercise. Happens to be curls, this routine. A lot of times it is the Nordic hamstring curl. And I'll explain the difference in those in a little bit. One last set of Bulgarians. Hopefully this angle is not jarring or disorienting. Just wanted to get another angle for y'all. Make it exciting. All right, I'm getting set up for RDLs, Romanian deadlifts. And if you remember, I included this in the hip hinge movements earlier because, well, it's a hip hinge. I mentioned that hip hinges, that hip category was mostly focused on glutes. And that's true, but it would not be completely correct to say that it doesn't engage the hamstrings at all. As I mentioned in the intro, hamstrings have 2 jobs, right? One is knee flexion, but hip flexion, or hip extension, hip extension is the other. So you certainly get some of that in movements like RDLs, where you're going down and you will feel it in your hamstrings and your glutes, right? So just wanted to point that out, that this is a posterior chain movement. Part of your posterior chain is your hamstrings. But that is different than the knee flexion movements that are going to be that lower hamstring or that focused movement category. It's really important to work both of them. Most muscle injuries are like either a lack of mobility can be one, muscle exhaustion, but muscle imbalance, I think, is probably severely overlooked. People will have overdeveloped quads and they'll pull a hamstring. They'll have underdeveloped glutes and they'll pull a hamstring, and all the other combinations of that. So that's why it's so important to not overlook any one particular muscle group. And that's why I call out knee flexion, hamstring movements as the most overlooked, because that's where I see the most issues for me personally is my hamstring. And that's why I'm just really big on making sure that you look at these 5 categories and make sure that you are hitting each of these categories so you know that you've hit and you're well balanced and your volume is distributed. And then also look and pay attention to your weaknesses. I know my hamstrings are a weak point, so I don't neglect them. I do RDLs and I do a hamstring thing. Many of you will be like, my calves suck. That's why you spam calf raises, right? You just have to be aware of your strengths and weaknesses within the overall 5 movement categories and make sure you're balancing that for your goals. That was like a summary. I still have more things to talk about, so buckle up. But we're going to do our first set of RDLs. We're at 205, shooting for 6 to 8. I'm supposed to say this for the knee flexion. This is what most people skip. If you're only doing RDLs, you're only training half of the hamstring function. I had that in my script. My scripts are pretty loose. You might have noticed. I go off script a lot. I forget the script. I go off bullet points and I just make things up. Sorry, not sorry, I guess. All right, next set, RDLs. Stop beeping, watch. I wanted to change up the angle so you can get a good shot of my booty while I do these. I'm not going to take off my pants or anything, but maybe after we get to know each other a little bit better. All right, so that covers it for the knee flexion, hamstring spiel. You're probably tired of hearing me talk about how my personal hamstring injuries has made me overcompensate on my hamstrings. It's probably your assessment. But so we'll move on to what I call unilateral or knee and hip hybrid movements. We've already talked about them all, so we won't spend a lot of time here. A lot of these can fit into one of the other movement categories. They can be knee and or hip focused. The thing that sets them apart is that they're unilateral, so they will counteract imbalances. We talked about Bulgarian split squats, which I love. TG split squats, which I also love. And lunges, which I only love a little less. I still love them, but just a little less. And with all of these movements, obviously Bulgarian and ATGs are a forward movement, so they're going to be a little bit more quad. But with lunges, the cool thing about lunges is that you can do backwards lunges, and that's going to make it a little bit more hip, a little bit more hamstring glute focused. So your step direction and your torso angle will determine whether it feels more like a squat or more like a hinge. That's all I will say about these unilateral movements. I have no idea if this angle is a good or a very bad idea. If you were looking at my butt before, that's all there is to look at. It's a good thing video is only for the eyes and not the nose. I haven't been quiet as tooty today as yesterday, but I have been known to fart. All right. I believe I said I would show you how I do my leg curls earlier in the video or something like that. So I just have these ankle straps that I got off Amazon. They're nothing fancy. This main strap goes around my ankle, and then this strap is like a stirrup. It goes under my foot. It helps keep me a little stabilized, especially when I'm pulling backwards. Right? The ankle cuff would be enough for doing adductor things if you're just pulling to the side. But when it comes to pulling back, I don't want the cuff to slide up or down. So that's what that little stirrup strap is for. And I just use my cable machine in the lower setting like I do for seated rows and such. And I do not have a leg extension or a leg curl machine. So my options for leg curls are somewhat limited. This is one that I have found. I will show you one more after I get this first set. We'll talk about, shoot, what are they called? What are they called? Sliding leg curls or something like that. Let me get the right name for you. That's it, sliding leg curls. So I'll show you those after we do this first set. All right, I'm hooked in. Take a step back, balance myself, go forward, and I'm gonna try to focus on knee flexion, right? I'm trying not to move the hip. That would engage a different part of the hamstring, hip flexors, glutes, would take away from the hamstring. So, in fact, if I'm a little bit more upright, would probably help. I love that this is unilateral as well. Most of you, like, what is it, 70% of the population, I'm right-handed. So my left leg is actually stronger than my left. Sorry, my left leg is stronger than my right. So I like being able to work these separately. That being said, I have pulled both hamstrings. So both need to be worked. Yes, there we go. Ooh-wee. All right. Now, I probably won't be able to do this all out because I'm literally just coming off of a big curl exercise. But I do want to at least demonstrate what the sliding curl would be. The idea is that you have either, it can be unilateral or bilateral. If you do bilateral, you have one towel or both of your feet on sliders. For unilateral, you have one leg down and you start in a bridge, and already I can feel, you'll feel it right away. If you've never done them, you'll feel your hamstring engage. And the idea is that you lower and then pull it back in, right? And the higher you can get your bridge, your hips in the air, the better the workout is, the more you will feel it. Doing it with both feet is going to be a little bit easier. Doing it with one leg is going to be a little bit harder. And then you can also add, I think, I might be confusing this for bridges, but I think you add a weight plate on your hip. That can also increase the load. But quite honestly, just doing the unilateral version is quite enough for me. I've shown you now two, let me get the angle so you can see a little better. I've given you two versions of leg curls you can do at home without a leg curl machine, without a leg extension machine. So no excuses. Oh, another one that you can do, maybe you can't because most people don't have a glute ham raise machine, but glute ham raises is another thing that will work your posterior chain. So I don't have it. I thought about getting one for a long time to help with Nordics, but I just don't have the space and they're expensive. One thing I like to do on these curls, and that goes for sliding curls and it goes for on a leg curl machine as well. I like to control the eccentric, the extension as well. Yes, certainly you want to have a great flexion and a great concentric motion, but it is almost equally, if not more important, to get tension under load, time under tension, and get a eccentric load as well, meaning when your joint is lengthening, stretching instead of flexing as well. That is another reason why I love Nordic hamstring curls, which, if you're lucky, I will go back and add some B-roll footage of that so you can see what that looks like. But those predominantly focus on the extending and the eccentric load on the hamstrings, which has been proven to help prevent hamstring injury, especially in people who do sports like soccer or ultimate frisbee or foosball. I don't know how many that was. Hopefully that was 10. One more workout to go, and that fits into our last category, which is accessories. And I think this is another big area that people can overlook, right? It's easy to be like, oh, I'm just going to get my core lifts for the day, or just get my core lifts period. Maybe that's fine every now and again in your hurry and you've got accessories towards the end of the workout like me, but you don't want to neglect them chronically. So I don't struggle with calf size. I'm a little bit genetically blessed there. So I don't necessarily do calf raises for hypertrophy of my calves. I do them for mobility because my ankles are not very mobile. So I like to do calf raises in a negative. I make sure I'm up a little bit on a weight plate or some kind of incline. And so helps with my ankle mobility. And also I've struggled with plantar fasciitis in the past. And man, deficit calf raises are the miracle worker for those. So that's why I do calf raises. I also like to, if the routine allows for it, I like to do groin or adductor work. I used to, before I had those ankle cuffs, I'd just use a band. I get a band, tie it around the bottom of the squat rack, and put the other around my leg, and I can do these movements, right? These leg extensions where your leg goes out, right? So the band would be around my left leg here, and I'd be pulling it out. And it's easy to progressive overload on that. You just do add more reps, and then when you get to the top of your rep range, you get a heavier band. Last week I forgot to put on the clip. I almost did it again. Let me check the weight. 135. Let me get this plate in place. So don't neglect your accessory work, your smaller leg muscles like your adductor, your calves. I think it's a great way to get injured if you avoid strengthening those and you're only working on the other muscle groups. I'm not saying you have to do each one of these every time. This current routine that I'm doing doesn't have any specific adductor work. I made that choice. I did a lot previously because I did injure my hamstring last summer. And so I did a lot of rehab and PT. So I'm like coming off of doing a lot of adductor work. I was doing it in addition to leg day. So that's why I've chosen to do calves, because the last routine I didn't do calves. I don't need to do calves all the time, but I wanted to do some calves. So that's why don't completely ignore your accessories, but don't feel like you have to fill up your workout with accessories either. Obviously, calf raises is one of those things that can be bilateral or unilateral like I'm doing. It's a little harder to do unilaterally when you're standing, but it's still more of a workout than it would be to use both legs. Be sure to stick around to the end. We will do our daily check-in where I give you my weigh-in for the day. We look and see how my weight trend is looking, if I'm still on track or not for this 20-week cut. And we'll look at my nutrition from yesterday and see how I was able to hit or if I missed my calorie and protein goals. I do that every workout to give you a peek behind the curtain of someone who has made a plan based off of their calorie needs and protein needs and their goal to cut. And so you can see exactly what I'm eating and what I'm not eating, how I'm tracking my food. Because when I was first starting out, I wish I had that visibility. I wish someone would have shown me exactly how they're using an app or a system to track their calories, because I had no idea how you do that. And it seemed really hard to do, but it's really not. So stick around and I'll show you. All right, here's an interesting angle for calf raises. See how this looks. Hopefully I don't crush the camera. All right, so you can see I'm going down in a negative here and then coming up. Trying not to put much weight on my left leg if I can. And my favorite part of this is right here, being down, getting that stretch on the calf muscle. Oh, and that's the thing. That is the cure for plantar fasciitis, in my humble opinion. I like to do unilateral calf raises too because my left leg is stronger. So hopefully this is helping cure that imbalance a little bit. All right, that's it for the workouts. Stick around, we'll do the check-in. But just to recap on the accessory work that we talked about, you'll notice those last two that I did, I only did 2 sets. Part of the reason is because it's accessory, part of the reason is because it's unilateral. So I don't want to take up too much time. And I promised you that you could hit all these categories and not add more workouts or add more time to your workout. And that's one of the ways that you can do that. So make sure you're hitting accessories. And if you need to, do 2 sets instead of 3. Ladies and gentlemen, our check-in for the day, we weighed in at 186.4 today. So we dropped a little bit of weight since yesterday at 186.7. Average for the week, 186.1, which is on track for losing 1 pound. Obviously, I'm shooting for more than that. At the beginning of the cut, we were shooting for 2 pounds with metabolic adaptation. I'm lucky if I get 1.5 pounds. So 1.5 pounds, 1.5 pounds would be great. I'd take 1.2, 1.25. So I think we're on track. We'll see. Let's look at the calories for yesterday. If I can stick with yesterday, I think that'll help. 1769s, but 200 grams of protein. So that's great. I like to hit 200 grams. That's the ideal target. I would take a little less protein to be able to get closer to 1500 calories. I probably need to do that for the next few days if I want to hit 1700 calorie average, because today is over 1700. Tuesday and Monday were 2000 and over. So I need to have a couple of low calorie days to have my average be closer to 1700 versus 1900. Yesterday's food, as you can see how I got to that, was with my morning coffee. There's a little bit of almond milk and protein powder as far as calories and protein, and some creatine for supplement. Greek yogurt later in the morning. For lunch, chicken sticks. Oh, this is a little, what do you call it? Slim Jim type thing, but it's chicken and it's really low calorie. Some beef jerky, an apple, and 1.5 cups of venison chili. I finished off the chili finally. For dinner, I had some just seasoned chicken from Aldi, and I just cooked here because I wanted to get the weight for what it is cooked. And if you're interested in seeing how I do that, how I add recipes, it's pretty simple. So even this is just like a one thing. So I'll take a raw chicken sometimes and I will put in the raw weight and then cook it and then measure the cooked weight. So I know, so when I have leftovers and stuff like that, I know how much I'm having rather than relying on the back of the label of the raw meat. If that's something you're interested in, let me know. I'd be happy to show you exactly how I go through like very simple cooked versions of food to be able to measure them, and maybe even like recipes. The rest of the meal, pretty straightforward. Some Greek yogurt, salsa with the chicken, and an orange. Throughout the day, I had my peppermint gum. I had some rice snacks for a snack, and then I had 2 David bars. I had a regular David bar, and I had the new bronze David bar, which is a little less protein, 20 grams as opposed to 28, but still only 150 calories. I will probably only be having 1 David bar or 0 David bars today, because if you don't know, David bars have this additive. It's like this like plant EPJ or something like that. I'll get back to you, but it can cause some intestinal issues for you and affect how things come out. So a word to the wise, don't have like 5 David bars per day because your stomach will not thank you. But certainly like 1 a day. I haven't had any issues, and I'm trying to find out, like, can I have 2 a day? I don't know. We'll see, because they've got the different kinds now. And then I snuck in a couple of dark chocolate sea salt caramels again. And that's really the only reason why we're above like 1600 is because I had those at the end of the day. I couldn't say no. So yeah, just a moment of weakness, but overall we're, in range. So see if I can ignore the caramels today and stick to that 15 to 1600 calories. That will be the goal. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you've watched to the end, big shout out, thank you. Obviously that would mean that this video has probably been helpful to you. If so, like the channel, subscribe. Thank you for those of you who already have, and I will see you next time.